years ago this month.
She was the most famous opera singer in the world. There was nobody else. There was Callas, and there were other wonderful singers, but she was the most wonderful, illustrious, controversial singer in the world.
The extraordinary thing about Callas was the fantastic intensity with which she performed. She drew you in. There was no question you were spellbound by her performance.
The way she could do runs, keep in tune, all sorts of things. For me, it was a new experience. And the drama in her actual singing and the whole package, as it were, is something which would have, I think, impact upon anybody nowadays.
Maria Callas singing O Sole Ti Vela from Act 2 of Bellini's Il Pirata. And before we heard the speaking voices of baritone Victor Godfrey, conductor Sir Edward Downes and recording producer Christopher Rayburn. It's 30 years now since Maria Callas died at just 53 years old. At the time of her death in September 1977, she was a recluse who'd faded into obscurity and the most famous opera singer of her time, possibly of all time. During the last desperately unhappy and lonely years of her life, she could never have known that in the next millennium her recorded heritage would create almost as much impact as she had done in her short career when she'd been a legend in her own lifetime. The demand today for her art is still so great that to mark the 30th anniversary of her death, EMI is releasing a 70 CD set. Yes, 70 CDs. They include all her studio recordings and also 13 live concert and recital performances. And they include some unofficial, privately made recordings that vary very considerably in their sound quality. But even in the least well-recorded documents, which were secretly made on domestic equipment, like this extract here from Donizetti's Anna Bolena in a London concert in 1962, the huge range of dynamics, expression and colour in Maria Callas's singing shine through unmistakably. Maria Callas mesmerized music lovers, singers, stage directors and conductors. It wasn't just her pyrotechnical virtuosity that thrilled her admirers. There was an extraordinary range of expression, colours and dynamics in her singing, and an intensity, imagination and subtlety in her acting that set new standards in opera and exerted a tremendous influence on audiences and performers. People travelled thousands of miles or queued up literally for days and nights to see her. And this was despite the fact that she certainly wasn't to everyone's taste. There were some people who disliked what they felt was the cutting edge in her voice. And there were also those who found her interpretations too overbearing. And perhaps no other opera singer has ever received quite so much critical and often unkind and inaccurate gossip attention from the media. She was sometimes portrayed as a tyrannical and impossibly temperamental prima donna who walked out on performances and created grief for other artists. Well, she did leave a performance once, as we'll be hearing later on, and she was completely intolerant of carelessness or incompetence anywhere on the stage or in the pit. But the reality of Maria Callas, both as an artist and a person, does not tally at all with the image of an indulgent egocentric that has been furnished in some quarters. The vast majority of performers who worked with Maria Callas loved her, and they found her an ideally professional and straightforward colleague, one of the most deeply serious artists ever to step on the stage, and totally devoted to her aspiration to try to realize the truth and essence of the composer's creation as best she could. It was always a struggle for her. She was tortuously self-critical and highly vulnerable, and despite all her phenomenal vocal resources, she suffered painful fears and anxieties. It was her draconian self-discipline and passionate love of her art that enabled her to overcome these difficulties until later in her career, when she increasingly encountered problems in her upper register. When she was at her height during the 1950s, she projected with a controlled power, outstanding intonation and remarkable breath control that was equally impressive in dramatic and lyrical music. She was absolutely a dramatic spinto with a high coloratura, but her seamless legato line and flexible phrasing also brought a unique magic to lyrical passages. It was all this, as well as her meticulous musicianship, her fastidious concern for accuracy, her mastery of infinite subtle nuances, and her electrifying acting, that created such an exceptionally powerful impression on her audiences. It was like that even when she just spoke a few words, as Verdi's Lady Macbeth does when she reads aloud the letter she's received from Macbeth. In it he tells her of his encounter with the witches, who proclaimed him Thane of Cawdor and King hereafter. It inspires her to call on the spirits of hell to help her.
per le udite cose, quando i nunzi del re mi salutaron sir di caudori. Vaticigno uscito dalle veggenti stesse che predissero un serto al capo mio. Racchiudi in cor questo segreto, addio. Ambizioso spirito, tu sei Macbetta, alla grandezza lì, ma sarai tu
Maria Callas in the role of Lady Macbeth, as portrayed by Verdi in his opera Macbeth. That performance took place in 1959, when Callas was still at the height of her powers and enjoying sensational fame. She was then just 35 years old, but she'd already been singing professionally for 18 years, and music had been her greatest passion since she'd been just 8 years old. That was when she was living in New York, and in fact that's where she'd been born in 1923. Her parents, though, were Greek, George and Evangelia Kalegoropoulos, and her father had changed the family name to Callas when he set up a pharmacy business in New York. Maria's parents weren't at all happy together. They used to have violent quarrels, and finally in 1937 they separated, and Maria went to live with her mother in Athens. It was there that she began to study singing seriously with Maria di Trivella. Callas had already been a very gifted piano student since she was 8, but now she showed that she had a really exceptional and prodigious singing talent. Just 2 years later, when she was just on the cusp of being only 15 years old, she sang the demanding role of Santuzza in the Athens Conservatoire's performance of Cavalleria Rusticana. Although she coped with the part impressively, the young Maria Callas decided she wanted to work like a slave on her technique to achieve the greatest possible dynamic and expressive extremes in her voice. And so now she studied intensively with the coloratura expert Elvira de Hildago, and this was to develop the technique and projection that was to make her so famous in due course. In 1941, aged just 17, she made her professional opera debut, singing the small role of Beatrice in Boccaccio with the Lyric Theatre in Athens. For the next 4 years, she sang a wide range of roles there, appearing as Maria Kalegoropoulos. She certainly made her name as an exceptionally promising artist, and it looked as though she was going to have a fine career in Greece. But at the end of the war, she found herself in the midst of one of the first of what was to be many disputes in her life. She was accused of having been a collaborationist with the enemy because she sang for German troops whilst Athens was occupied by the Nazis. It was a ridiculous charge because, in fact, she'd managed to save her family's life by diverting the soldiers' attention with her singing. That already tells us something about Maria Callas's strength of character, and what happened subsequently was an early sign of her determination and independence. She decided she'd had enough of Greece, where she felt everything was narrow-minded and limited, and so she decided to go back to New York and build an international career in a country where she was hardly known at all. Things certainly did not work out smoothly for some time, and the story of her life during the next 2 years is a really remarkable tale of endurance and self-discipline. Maria Callas recalled it herself when she appeared in a New York Metropolitan Opera intermission feature with the American musicologist, the late Edward Downes. In 1968.
Nobody wanted to talk to me. I mean, no agent would touch me and give me a job because I was immediately after my debut in Italy, was not loved that much. I was something new to listen to, and they disliked anything that took them away from tradition. Yes, it's incredible.
It's incredible. And
then when they came and said, well, now there is so-and-so, the theater that wants a contract from you, I said, well, thank you very much. I have already the offer. I don't have to go through you.
Yes.
That caused a lot of fight. In fact, lots of booing that I've had persistently in the theater was caused by these people who were trying desperately. Well, engagements were not that easy in that time, also because there were more singers, but also because they really came to me when they just couldn't find another one to cast in the role. So finally, when they did come, they knew that I would be expensive, and but I promise you that it wasn't frequent. It was about every 4 or 5 months that I would have a role.
Maria Callas. She mentioned how audiences were taken aback by her because she wasn't performing in the kind of traditional way that they'd been used to.
It wasn't at all easy. I had struggles in Italy. I think they found a new element in me. What they considered bel canto was just a beautiful voice singing, whereas with mine they just had to work their minds a little more. They had emotions that they didn't feel before. I was going against the so-called tradition, which was then not so good, because the tradition of high, long-held notes and overdone phrases, you know, all this business that I had to fight for enormously.
You had to fight to put the interpretation
to clean down,
voice.
put music back to its place, and not have these enormous long notes with these cadenzas that never finish, and, you know, real old bad tradition.
Well, someone who did notice Maria Callas's talents and strongly approved of her approach to her roles was the conductor Tullio Serafin. He was a highly revered and influential musician who'd been vitally helpful to the development of many major singers at the outset of their careers, and he realized that Callas could become a virtuoso interpreter of the very demanding Italian bel canto repertoire. He now began to coach her for parts in which she was to become legendary, such as Violetta in Verdi's La Traviata, the title role in Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, and Elvira in Bellini's I Puritani. Serafin insisted that Callas should sing Elvira at very short notice at the La Fenice Opera House in Venice in 1949. And when she did, she brought the house down with her coloratura brilliance, her dramatic power, and also her magnetic stage acting. It was her first major international sensation. Just a few months later, she sang some extracts from the opera in her first set of recordings for the Cetra Company. In this aria, Vien di letto e in ciel la luna, Elvira, who's now completely lost her mind, hallucinates that she's with Arturo, the man she loves, and she fantasizes that she's about to marry him. But in fact, in her madness, she has mistaken him for Riccardo, the man she's refused to marry, who's plotted against her and Arturo. Maria Callas performing the cabaletta Vien di letto e in ciel la luna, sung by Elvira in Bellini's I Puritani. It was performed there very early in Callas's international career, back in 1949. She was accompanied by the Turin Radio Orchestra, conducted by Arturo Basile. Also in her repertoire at that time were roles in operas by a composer whose works she rarely, if ever, sang in her later, most famous years, Richard Wagner.
She sang a performance of Brunhilde in Valkyria 11 days before singing I Puritani. I mean, Brunhilde? Vespri Siciliani? No singer has covered that range of repertoire since Lily Lehmann. But she had the volume and quality of voice to sing Turandot, one of her earlier successes, but to sing Isolde. She sang Isolde when she was 26 or something like this, and then discovered or developed her talent for coloratura, and then Tosca. I don't think any soprano has covered in a short career and a damaged career in many respects such a repertoire. It wasn't an enormous repertoire, but what she did had a fantastic range of technique, and I think that was unequalled.
And that was the conductor and scholar Bernard Keefe. Among the first batch of recordings that Maria Callas made for Cetra in 1949, which have all been included in EMI's 70 CD set, is the closing scene from Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, the Liebestod, as Isolde sings of the perfect union of love with the dead Tristan that awaits both of them in the afterlife, and then she dies at his side. Maria Callas sings it in Italian here. Isolde joins her beloved Tristan in death. Maria Callas singing the Liebestod from Wagner's Tristan und Isolde in Italian, and that was one of her first recordings made in 1949. Word soon spread about Callas's electrifying performances, and she was engaged to sing a production at the Maggio Musicale in Florence that was to have a vital consequence for her career. It's quite a story. Despite the impact she was making in Italy, the intendant of La Scala Opera in Milan, Antonio Ghiringhelli, didn't want her to sing there. She did make an appearance in 1950, stepping in at short notice to replace Renata Tebaldi for 3 performances of Aida. But in fact the reception wasn't anything special at all, and that strengthened Signor Ghiringhelli's determination not to engage her for a production. But then 2 events forced him to change his decision. Firstly, Arturo Toscanini had auditioned Callas for a projected La Scala production of Verdi's Macbeth, and he was so very impressed with Callas that he wrote to Ghiringhelli instructing him to send her a letter of intent for an engagement. Ghiringhelli very much wanted Toscanini back at La Scala, so he complied, and although the projected production never took place, he couldn't ignore Toscanini's advocacy of Callas. And that led to the second happening that finally forced him to offer Maria Callas a contract at La Scala. In May 1951, Callas appeared in the role of Elena in Verdi's I Vespri Siciliani, in a very important production at the Maggio Musicale Opera in Florence with Erich Kleiber conducting. She created the same kind of sensation that she'd made in I Puritani in Venice 2 years earlier, and now Ghiringhelli was forced to admit that he must take her on at La Scala. And there she was to be the house's most coveted artist for the next 7 years. This is the performance at the Teatro Comunale in Florence that finally made that inevitable. From the Teatro Comunale in Florence in May 1951, Maria Callas in Verdi's I Vespri Siciliani. And although that performance has been available on pirated CDs, it's the very first time now that the original master tapes in top quality have been transferred to CD in the recording that you've just heard, which is available on the Testament label. It's just being released right now for the 30th anniversary of the death of Maria Callas. 7 months after Maria Callas's appearance in the Teatro Comunale in I Vespri Siciliani, she made her official La Scala debut in the same role of Elena. And again, the only word that can accurately be used to describe the event is sensation. At La Scala, she very deeply impressed the music director, Victor de Sabata, and the conductor who succeeded him there several years later was equally impressed and equally keen to work with her. He was Herbert von Karajan. And it wasn't just the leading conductors of the day that wanted to work with Maria Callas. She was also sought out by a new generation of top stage directors, and especially Luchino Visconti and Franco Zeffirelli. Over the years, these artists collaborated with her in productions in which she became legendary, as much for her acting as for her singing. In 1952, she made her debut at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, in the role of Norma. And that was also the first time that the conductor, Edward Downes, now Sir Edward Downes, worked there. By the way, he's no relation at all of the American musicologist of the same name. Sir Edward had been engaged specifically to be the repetiteur and prompter for Callas at Covent Garden.
I was engaged as a repetiteur and prompter for Callas's Norma, and it was for me a most amazing situation, because apart from the work that I was doing, to be close to this magnificent singer 3 or 4 meters away from her all the time was an extraordinary experience. The extraordinary thing about Callas was the fantastic intensity with which she performed. She was there at every rehearsal, absolutely at the beginning. There was no messing around. She was absolutely conscientious and deadly serious about what she was doing. And her diction, it was so absolutely clear, you could take it down from dictation, which is more than one could say about lots of divas. And for me, I would say that she was possibly the greatest opera singer that I've ever encountered.
From Bellini's opera Norma, Casta Diva, Norma's prayer to the chaste goddess for strength and protection as she and her people go to war. Maria Callas at Covent Garden on the third night of the run of performances that marked her sensational debut in the house in November 1952. Just 2 weeks earlier, she'd been seen for the very first time by a young man who was later to become a major figure in the recording of opera as the Decca Record Company's head of opera production. Christopher Rayburn had exceptionally been able to get access to one of her rehearsals of Norma.
When I first came to hear Callas, I'd never actually even heard of her. I was at the time on stage management at the Mermaid Theatre and as an understudy actor there. And it was all run by Bernard Miles and his daughter Sarah. She must have been about 21 at the most. She was an usherette selling programs at Covent Garden. And Sarah told me there was going to be a dress rehearsal at Covent Garden with a very good singer, and she was going to sing Norma. So I said, Norma? What's Norma? So she explained to me it was an opera. So, 2 days later, I went to this closed rehearsal of Norma with Maria Callas, and it was an absolute revelation to me. I'd never heard singing like it in my life. I'd never seen a personality on an operatic stage like Callas, and it was overwhelming, quite extraordinary, and it shaped very much my whole appreciation of bel canto.
Norma became one of Maria Callas's legendary roles. One of many, of course, but she was particularly famous in this part, and also in 2 very different other roles, Violetta in Verdi's La Traviata and Tosca in Puccini's opera. She brought out Violetta's vulnerability with almost overwhelming pathos.
voice, as a voice, was certainly not the most beautiful one I'd ever heard, but it possibly had the widest range of expression, the widest ability to express the extremes of emotional intensity of almost any voice that I've ever encountered. And even the hardened stagehands who had heard everyone every night for donkey's years, they were absolutely spellbound by these performances. You thought with Callas, in Tosca also, that she suddenly became the person. Yeah, and it was very difficult in subsequent years, in subsequent performances of these operas, because one had become used to imagining the ideal Violetta or the ideal Tosca, and you always thought of Callas, not only what she sounded like, but the way she behaved, the way she walked, even the way she looked.
Forse lui. Violetta, realizing that Alfredo's love has really affected her. How beautiful it really would be to be loved and to give love. But she's very confused, because that would mean giving up the wild, high life she's been addicted to, although she knows that that can't last long anyway. She's a consumptive, and her days are numbered. We've just heard Callas in part of a rehearsal of La Traviata in Dallas in 1957, and by that time she also looked ideal in the role on stage, as she'd slimmed down very strikingly from how she'd been several years earlier. That added even more to the exceptional impression Maria Callas made when she performed Violetta at Covent Garden the following year, exceptional even for her. One of the most extraordinary of all moments came in the second act, when, absolutely against what she really wants, Violetta agrees to give up her beloved Alfredo, because his father, Giorgio Gemmo, has told her she'll bring disgrace and suffering on his family, and principally his young daughter who's getting married. Here, Callas's poignancy was almost unbearable. Dite alla giovine, si bella e pura. Say to your daughter, so beautiful and pure, that there's a victim of misfortune whose one ray of happiness before she dies is a sacrifice made for her. Whenever and wherever Callas sang this passage, there was almost always an absolute hush in the audience. She was barely audible, and yet there was an almost stifling intensity that held the audience spellbound. Maria Callas's extraordinary breath control there enabled her to express with deep nobility the intense grief that Verdi so precisely asked for in his score. Amazing as her performance was, if you analyze what she was doing, you notice that she was singing exactly what the composer had written, with musical and technical perfection. Verdi's markings are pianissimo con estremo dolore, and then agermo piangendo, very quietly with extreme grief, and then turgermo, weeping. And there was even something else very subtly special indeed in that passage that the scholar and impresario Lord Harwood found out about from Callas when he was in charge of the casting at the Royal Opera House.
I remember saying to her, where did you get the idea of saying in Di Tella Giovine, si bella e pura? And she used to sing Di Tella Giovine, si bella pura, with a tiny caesura, not a breath, but just a catch of four, meaning I am not pure. How can I use the word like that? But of course, that was the right word to use. And she said, oh, that was Seraphine. That was Seraphine's notion, that you just make this tiny, tiny pause to emphasize that she recognizes, even though she's left the whole world, the demi-monde, and to live with Alfredo, that she still recognizes that she's not quite entitled to even send a message to this girl she's never met. And there were so many things of that kind that she could do.
For Maria Callas, it was so important to evoke the real essence of Violetta's personality and her feelings that she would take dangerous risks to attempt what she felt must be the absolute ideal in accordance with Verdi's exact intentions. The conductor Nicola Resigno was in the pit for many of her La Traviata performances.
I remember once in Traviata, you know, in Addio del Passato, there was a note that she always cracked. And I said to Maria, I said, well, Maria, attack it a little bit more forte, and then you could diminish it, you know? And she said, oh, you're right, I'm such a dumbbell, you know, and so on and so forth. But night after night, this would repeat it. And she says, well, she says, I don't care how cracked, there I'm dying, and that's the way it's going to be.
Maria Callas used to say that all she ever did was to search and slave away to get the very utmost out of composers' scores. Well, all she ever did is such an understatement. The point is that for all her fire and intensity, she was immensely disciplined and meticulously searching in her quest to be 100% faithful to the letter and detail of the composer's wishes. She deplored histrionics, and maybe the greatest quality of all in her performances was the remarkable union of passion and objectivity.
You serve with your instrument music, actually. It isn't enough that you have a beautiful voice. You must take this voice and break it up to 1,000 pieces, so she will serve you in all the written phrases, coloratura, and expressions that you must do.
And all
because they are mostly written there.
And the unwritten things, too.
Well, yes, it's true. That is colors and all that. But there are lots of written things. And by written, I don't mean just vocalizing.
Yes.
Because they write things, yes, the notes. But after that, you must put the phrase together with artistry.
And that cost Maria Callas dearly. Her intense striving for artistic perfection began to take its toll as the years went by. That trouble she had at the end of Addio del Passato in La Traviata, which was in Lisbon in 1958, was a relatively early instance of the kind of difficulties she increasingly had to face as time marched on. She was, of course, painfully aware of the problems, and, like everything in her life, she was profoundly honest about them. She also felt more and more isolated by them. On the one hand, her troubles were seized on by publicists and gossip writers who loved to try to create whatever scandal they could about her. And on the other hand, there were people who didn't help her an iota when they showered her with flattery, as though they either hadn't any idea what she was going through, or, much more likely, were pretending to her that they didn't notice. What Maria Callas needed, and hardly ever received, was real support from those who cared and understood. But there was one person who did give this to her, and she became a very special friend. The soprano Virella Freni, herself one of the very finest in the world.
She was so nice with me, I don't know, perhaps because when I met her the first time, she was in London. She has done a concert in Royal Festival Hall. I was at Covent Garden at the same time for to sing Susanna. A friend of us, me, also of Maria, invited me to go to the concert, for to listen. I was so happy, enthusiastic. After the concert, he takes me in the dressing room of Maria. But I must explain you, before she has sung also Norma, Casta Diva, and the Cabaletta. In Cabaletta, in the IC, she arrived, but was not really completely clear, no? She make a little like this, she escaped. But she has sung incredibly everything. But I tell you this because there is a reason. When I was in the dressing room, I started, really, I was so enthusiastic, so happy. She looked at me, she was so nice, she said, me too, I was in La Scala when you had sung La Bohème, you are incredible, fantastic. She said incredible, beautiful things about me. But suddenly, she changed the expression, she came really serious, with the fingers. She put it in front of me and she said, okay, everything was okay, but this IC, the IC, my God, what I can say, but I must tell the truth always. I said, Madame Callas, I'm sorry, but was a little, not really completely free and well, but for me, I forgot that doesn't matter because you have sung incredibly. And from this moment, she said to our friend, please, now you bring Miss Freni in the dinner with us. She was incredible from this moment because I think I told the truth to her. You understand? Yes, after, really, she calls me on telephone many times because perhaps she needed to speak with somebody. He can tell her the truth, you understand? But also, another thing, she invited me, there was a very big party in the Savoy Hotel, and she asked to they put a place not too far from her. There was the menu, fantastic, a beautiful photo in front of her. I said, please, for me tonight was really incredible. Can you make autogram, no, for me in this menu? She said, yes. She wrote to Mirella Freni with a very big admiration, no? I wish her the big, incredible carriera, but also she wrote in Italian, felicità. You understand what I mean? Happiness, you know? And she looked at me in my eyes and said, do you understood what I mean? I said, yes, very, very well. This means she was not really happy.
And the first of two programmes commemorating the anniversary of the death of Maria Callas was written and presented by Jon Tolansky. You can hear the second programme in the Lyric Feature next Monday evening at 7 here on RTE Lyric FM.